Welcome back to the Habit-Based Lifestyle Podcast. I'm your host, Jesse Ewell, and today we're going to be talking about the habit of WTF. WTF. I know the first thing that you think about when you hear this is what the fear. That's right, what the fear. Do you have a habit of letting fear hold you back? The fear of taking a leap. The fear of leaping into the unknown. Do you let this fear control you? Do you let it hold you back? Do you let it keep you playing small? Do you let it keep you from taking a risk? Well, today we're going to talk about this fear, this what the fear, WTF, and how it has held me back in my life, especially when it's came to heights and things like that. So the facts for me are this. If you really want to know the truth, for the longest time, I have been afraid of heights. Terrified, especially when the heights are around water. I very rarely ever talk about it, but it's something that has controlled me and been on my mind for many years. Anytime I would go over a tall bridge, I would get anxiety, I would kind of pull into the middle lanes. And I can remember even living in a place called Gig Harbor, Washington, I had to always drive across the bridge, and I would almost always pull into the middle lanes so I didn't have to be on the outside because I felt safer there. Anytime I'd get into a hotel room, like in Vegas, we'd get rooms high up, I would get anxiety just getting close to the window and looking down. And most people would never know this, but deep down, I would have this fear and this feeling of anxiety around heights. So enter Christmas 2018. My wife buys both of us skydiving lessons for Christmas. And Katie decided it would be a good idea for us, specifically me, to face my fears and jump out of a plane. We've been planning this and planning skydiving for nearly 6 months, and it's caused a lot of nerves, anxiety, and fear to come up for me over these 6 months. And here's the other thing that would happen. The other thing that would happen is every time we booked a jump, it would get canceled due to weather. And imagine this: like, we live in California, but because of fog, where you couldn't see, our sessions would get canceled. Literally, we've had them canceled probably about 10 times. This made it even worse. So lucky me that this dragged on for literally almost 6 months. Actually, it's been 6 months. And I want to talk today a little bit about the feelings that came up for me in this situation. One of them being anxiety. Just being anxious about not knowing what was going to happen, not knowing how long someone had been trained to do this, not knowing, statistically what would happen, not knowing exactly how the whole thing works, never have doing it before. And there's like this anxiety that comes up a lot of times when we don't know exactly how something's going to happen. And then this feeling of fear of dying, fear of getting hurt, paralyzed, or chute not opening. And then there's the pressure of having to follow through with something once that you commit to it. Once you commit to something, you have to follow through. And then the stories that begin to come up, the stories of playing safe. Wondering, hey, how many people have died from doing this? And how long have the jumpers been actually trained in doing this? And how safe is it? But over the weekend, this last Saturday, I had an opportunity to finally face my fear of heights. And Saturday came around, and even on Friday night, I remember thinking, man, we're probably going to cancel again because of weather. We woke up and it was cloudy. And right away I'm like, hey, have they called yet to cancel? Thinking they would. And Katie decided to actually call them first, and they're like, no, we're jumping today. Everything's good to go, and it'll be clear by the time you guys get here. So it didn't help that our jump was scheduled for 10 a.m. And when we got there, they're like, hey, it's going to be an hour and a half. So we left. Around then, it's 11:30. We come back. They're like, it's going to be another 45 minutes. So we end up waiting almost 3 hours before we even get suited up. And for most of the 3-hour wait, I felt pretty calm up until the point where we began to put on the harness and everything on the body. And then I kind of felt this fear and anxiety creep in as soon as we boarded the plane. And it was kind of crazy because we got on the plane and I didn't really feel super nervous or super scared or any of that. I just felt kind of like anxiety. But I swear no one else on the plane looked nervous but me. Everybody kept asking me, hey, are you all right, man? Are you cool? And I really just tried to remain calm and cool. And, my wife, I could hear her talking to the instructor she was jumping with, and the instructor I was with was like, hey, he's shaking a little bit, yet I don't really remember feeling any of it. And it didn't help that my wife was 2 people behind me, literally talking her instructor's ear off about how much fun this was going to be and how much she'd been looking forward to this and how I'm afraid of heights and everything else. So as we started to climb, I'm like, hey, this isn't that bad. We're not that high. But instead of letting fear continue to creep in and just kind of rule over me, I decided to put my energy into breathing. I just began to focus on my breath, and I used a mantra that I have learned over the last few months that has been super powerful and super impactful for me, and it goes like this: I am willing to be liberated by life. And really, what I find in that, when I say that, is some peace and calmness. And it's kind of like, hey, I'm willing to surrender to life and just let whatever happens happen. Not try to control it like normal, but just let it be in the flow. And as we got higher and higher, I would feel the anxiety come up, and I began to just focus on breathing and repeating this mantra. On our way up, the instructor said very little to me the entire time, but he did say 2 things that stuck out to me very clearly. He said, don't forget to smile and enjoy the ride. Don't forget to smile. And he had a camera on his wrist, and he kind of said, listen, like, whatever you do, like, smile and look at my wrist. That's where I have the camera. And he said, look around and enjoy the ride. There's nothing else like this in the world. There's no experience like this that you'll ever do. So make sure that you take some time to enjoy it and look around. And the last thing he said is, you will look at fear differently after this. And I didn't actually know what he meant. But I just kind of thought, well, that's kind of cool. Like, that's some pretty amazing things to say. But once we began to reach the drop zone, the plane began to kind of slow down. Everybody was hitting knuckles, kind of high-fiving, and everything stood still. It was like time stood still. I was towards the back of the plane, and all the guys around me, I think they were all single jumpers and people who videotape other people jumping out of the flight, and they were all kind of strategizing what they were going to do. But the door popped open, and all of a sudden, like 5 people are out, and they all jump right away. And I'm like, shit, like, this is really happening. And I was next, and I literally had no time to think about anything other than just going for it. It was like we were scooting across the back of the plane, and we just jumped and went for it. Like, there was no time to stand there and wait or, even look around. And as I even talk about this, I feel kind of this emotion and like this feeling I got right before I jumped. And as soon as we went out, it felt like I was entering a dream. I just remember kind of jumping out and yelling and screaming like, ah! And I just kind of let myself float. And I just remember, look at the camera, smile, have fun. And after a few seconds, I started to actually look around I could see the water, could see the mountains, you could see the ocean, and you just kind of had this singular focus of you were in your own world. It was like you were present, falling in your own world. And after a few seconds, I started to relax and just kind of be in the moment. I remember opening my mouth a couple times, and my face and my lips literally just started flapping in the wind. I swallowed a bunch of air and made sure that I looked at the camera and smiled a few times and just enjoyed the ride and how it felt. It felt like several minutes went by. I'm sure it was like seconds. And by then, our parachute opened, and you kind of have like this thing where it feels a little bit like whiplash. But the first thing I wanted to do is obviously reach my arms up and make sure we were safe. But by the time this parachute opened, it was nearly over, and I realized my fear and anxiety was gone. And so I, yelled out a couple times, like, yeah, I did it. And the part that I would say I least liked was actually being in the parachute. It felt like you were just kind of dangling there. And I remained calm, but just tried to enjoy the rest. I looked up and was like, hey, my instructor's name was Roberto. I said, do you see my wife? And he's like, yeah, she's right there, and pointed to her. And I just kind of watched her for a second. But as we approached the ground and landed, I could feel myself shaking. Like as soon as we hit the ground, I was shaking with adrenaline. We landed and it was over, and I was safe. All the feelings and fears I had of dying, maybe the parachute malfunctioning, that all was gone. I looked over and I watched my wife land, and she actually landed on her feet. She got unbuckled right away, and we met halfway for a hug and kiss and then one last picture, and it was like, yeah, we did it. But I'll be honest with you, it took a couple hours for the adrenaline to wear off. I could feel it. Like my whole body was shaking. I kind of felt nauseous, sick to my stomach. My ears were kind of plugged. But after we were done, I went back through the experience a few times in my head. Like what was I thinking when I jumped out? What did it actually feel like? And I realized this one thing. As I went back through moments in this, I'm like, man, how many times have I let this same fear get in the way of my experience of life? How many times with physical challenges have I let this fear get in the way of me maybe working harder, maybe taking a risk, maybe in a business decision? It held me back from leaping. And I can tell you this, like there's many times in my life where I've held myself back from speaking up or speaking out, especially when it comes to putting myself out there in business. Even times to lead my family and step up. I could think of so many times when I actually did this, but what did I actually fear? What was I actually fearing when this came up? And oftentimes it's making a mistake, being wrong, being judged, not being good enough, possibly even dying. But what I realized is all these fears kept me from doing one thing, living in the present moment. So what is this fear? What is this thing that comes up? A lot of people say it's this false evidence appearing real, and that's great. Like I think to some extent, yeah, it's false evidence, but it's something that actually keeps us paralyzed from experiencing life and living in the present moment. So to me, fear is something that keeps us stuck and keeps us from experiencing life and what life has to offer and what experience life has to offer. And it keeps us really from living in this present moment. But think about fear in your life. Think about what's keeping you paralyzed from experiencing life and living in the present moment. Have you challenged it? Have you decided to not let it hold you back? Maybe it's, you getting off a medication you've been on for years that the doctor told you several years ago you had to be on or you could get sick. Maybe it's time you face this medication and actually question, do I really need to be on this? What would happen if I actually got off of it? Maybe it's going to the gym for the first time and realizing that most people at the gym don't care what you look like, what size you are, how slow you are, how big you are, how small you are, how whatever. Most people, 99.9% of people, will not even pay attention to you when you go to the gym. And that fear that's running you and keeping you from going, it's time you challenge it. Maybe it's speaking out publicly. I know this was one of mine. I would get this fear and anxiety of maybe I'd screw up, maybe I'd sound like an idiot, maybe I wouldn't say the right things. But all of these things kept me from actually speaking out and speaking my truth. Maybe it's from starting a new business. I know oftentimes there's this safety, this scarcity that keeps us safe. And so we don't actually choose to step out and start this business that we've always wanted to, yet it's the one thing that we are the most passionate about. Maybe it's telling your spouse for the first time, hey, like I'm hurt by the things that you've said, by the things that you've done. I don't like where our relationship's actually going. But whatever that is, whatever that fear is, I challenge you today to ask yourself a couple questions. What's holding you back from taking a leap into fear? Really, what is holding you back from taking this leap into fear? What are you most afraid of happening if you take this leap? And today I want to challenge you. I want to challenge you to take this leap today. No matter how big or small it may feel, I challenge you to simply just take a leap today of fear that's something that's been holding you back, no matter how big or small that is. And I promise you that if you step into it, it will not be even close to how bad you actually played it out in your mind, sort of like I did. And the reason I want to challenge you this, because how much of your life are you missing out on because you're not stepping into this fear and taking this leap into a new reality and a new place that you've never been. So I want to thank you guys for being a part of my podcast today and this show, and I hope that it's inspired you, and I hope that from this you'll take a leap into your fear, into whatever that is. Maybe it's at the gym, maybe it's starting that new business, but whatever it is, take the leap today and get going. If you are looking to connect further with a group of like-minded people, join myself, so many others in the Habit-Based Lifestyle Secrets group, where I'll be dropping daily habits to help you live to your full potential. Maybe you want to be one of our next case studies and begin living this habit-based lifestyle. If you have questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to contact me, Jesse at habitbasedlifestyle.com. Until next episode, have a great day.